The Syrian civil war, a complex and protracted conflict that has ravaged the nation for over a decade, stands as one of the most devastating humanitarian crises of the 21st century. From its humble beginnings as a peaceful uprising for reform and freedom in 2011 to its transformation into a multifaceted war involving regional and international actors, the Syrian civil war has left an indelible mark on the country and its people. Let's delve into the origins, dynamics, and consequences of this tragic conflict. Historical context. The roots of the Syrian civil war can be traced back to decades of authoritarian rule, socioeconomic grievances, and political repression under the Assad regime. The Assad family, led by Hafez al-Assad and later his son Bashar al-Assad, ruled Syria with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and maintaining control through a combination of coercion and patronage. Years of corruption, economic stagnation, and social inequality fueled discontent among the population, laying the groundwork for future unrest. Arab Spring and Uprising. The outbreak of the Arab Spring in 2011 provided a catalyst for popular uprisings against authoritarian regimes across the Middle East, including in Syria. Inspired by the success of protests in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, Syrians took to the streets to demand political reform, greater freedoms, and an end to government corruption. Peaceful demonstrations calling for change soon escalated into a full-blown uprising as the Assad regime responded with brutal repression, triggering a cycle of violence and unrest. Escalation into civil war. As the conflict intensified, Syria descended into a brutal civil war, pitting government forces against various opposition groups and factions. The Free Syrian Army FSA, composed of defected soldiers and civilians, emerged as a major opposition force seeking to overthrow the Assad regime and establish a democratic government. However, the opposition quickly fragmented as extremist groups, including ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates, gained strength and influence, further complicating the conflict. External interventions and proxy warfare. The Syrian civil war has become a battleground for regional and international powers vying for influence and strategic advantage. Countries such as Iran, Russia, Turkey, and the United States have intervened in the conflict, providing military support to different factions and exacerbating sectarian tensions. Iran and Russia have backed the Assad regime, while Turkey and Gulf states have supported various opposition groups. The involvement of external actors has prolonged the war and deepened divisions within Syrian society. Humanitarian catastrophe. The Syrian civil war has unleashed a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions, with millions of Syrians displaced, killed, or traumatized by violence and displacement. The use of chemical weapons, barrel bombs, and indiscriminate attacks on civilians by government forces and extremist groups have resulted in widespread suffering and civilian casualties. The destruction of infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and homes, has further exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, leaving millions in need of assistance. Diplomatic efforts and stalemate. Efforts to find a diplomatic resolution to the Syrian conflict have been hampered by geopolitical rivalries, competing agendas, and the intransigence of warring parties. Multiple rounds of peace talks, including the Geneva and Astana processes, have failed to yield a sustainable ceasefire or political settlement. Meanwhile, the Assad regime has clung to power with the backing of its allies, while opposition groups remain fragmented and weakened by infighting. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Syrian civil war stands as a tragic reminder of the human cost of conflict and the failure of diplomacy to end violence and suffering. What began as a peaceful uprising for reform and freedom has descended into a brutal and intractable war, fueled by sectarianism, external interventions, and geopolitical rivalries. As Syria continues to grapple with the devastating consequences of war, the urgent need for a political solution and humanitarian assistance remains paramount to alleviate the suffering of millions and pave the way for peace and reconciliation.